Pickaxe.
Hello and welcome back to the Review of Death, your fortnightly home for Doctor Who news and reviews. I'm Matthew Toffolo. Joining me from New Zealand is Billy Garrett-John. Say hello.
Hello, everybody. How are we all doing today?
I'm ready to go to bed. You're only ready to get up.
I feel like I'm ready to go to bed, and it's 5 to 7 in the morning.
My God.
We've got some news and bits and bobs to run through that we may have missed at the top of the last show. Obviously, in the last episode, we were talking about the return of a certain Miss Bush. And today we're talking about a new arrival off the top of the list, because, Matt, you've got a brand new baby.
Yes, I do. He's silver and he's got a lot of blue balls over him.
That sounds like a really serious tropical medical condition that you probably should take him to.
I mean, technically it's not my baby. Technically it's my brother's baby. He's got a new Dalek, so it's living in the house with us. So it's kind of like a joint child, but it's his really, and it's bloody brilliant.
It is. It looks fantastic. You sent me straight away a video of you titting around in it, and Johnny going, "Watch the walls, don't scrape the walls."
Yeah. Which could have been "watch the balls," which is what I thought he said at first.
Well, I mean, it's more important that you watch the Dalek than you watch the interior of the house you've just recently painted and decorated and moved into.
I can get some paint and touch up any scuffs on the walls, but painting those Dalek
but not
walls
that Dalek.
No. I don't want to be let loose on that. My God, it'd be a terrible disaster.
So, how have you... I mean, because I've obviously... I'm not going to be too heavy on this, but the fact you've never invited me to have a ride in Derek has always slightly upset me. But this Dalek is...
I mean, you can't really ride in Derek.
Smaller than Derek? No. I mean, Derek's full of spiders and shit.
Derek is full of spiders and shit. Well, it's substantially shorter than Derek. I mean, obviously Derek's a bit bullshit, really. In fact, I visited Derek on the weekend, and I looked at him and I thought, you know what? Although you're bollocks, you do look like you have stepped out of Destiny of the Daleks or Resurrection of the Daleks, and they all looked bollocks back then. I mean,
he looks like one of the props they've pre-cut to explode.
Yeah, it does. And I thought, you know what? All this, me thinking, what can I do to make it better? Nah, he's fine as he is.
No,
he's
you're
fine
not going to
shit.
repaint him then?
Oh, I don't know if I can be arsed now.
Oh, but imagine how cool it would be if you went for the Mutation of Time or one of those colour schemes. That'd look great.
I'll do it in black and pink Cancer Research Daypole colours.
Or you could do that awful Union Jack one that they did for the 50th anniversary convention.
Bollocks to that. I'd put it in Italy colours.
I find it interesting that nobody has come forward to say they're the owner of that Union Jack Dalek. Possibly because if you wanted to make a Dalek more racist, what do? You paint it with a particular flag. The Brexit Dalek.
It is, isn't it? Brexit Dalek.
I look forward to when I'm back, the first thing I'll do, parents and seeing, old folk that I'm related to can wait. I will make a beeline straight for the new Dalek, and I'll come around and have a ride in him.
And the nice thing is now I'm only 10 minutes round the corner from your parents, so...
So Dad can pop round and have a go when he fancies.
Exactly. He can pop round and have a look and see all the other bits and bobs.
You see, his trouble might not be that he's too tall for it. It might be that he's too wide to get in it these days. I haven't seen him for a while.
Nah, you'd be all right. It's actually quite spacious. Well, it's still it's a bit narrow around your head, but compared to Derek, you can actually move your legs around quite
That's what I'm worried about. Aeroplane seats are an issue for me, and obviously my height is a whole thing, so... Well, that's good. I feel a bit better about that now.
My concern is that when you're sat down, you're too long from the waist up.
Yeah. My trunk is too big.
Yeah, so I'm worried that your head, the dome won't fit on it.
I'll have to crouch. I'll just be like that the whole time. I did have I had a dream last night that I had a Cyberman helmet on. I had a...
Right.
This is, what Doctor Who fans dream of, obviously. I had a Revenge Cyberman helmet on, and I actually had a slight panic attack in my dream about being screwed into it, because I just thought,
oh my God,
if I don't like it and I freak out, it's going to take forever for someone to get me out of it. So, those are the kind of nightmares that I have.
I've tried the Cyber Leader head-on from my Cyber Leader suit, and I didn't screw it in, but compared to, like, say, that one, the Revenge one, which is so much bigger, or it feels a bit bigger, you just feel, once that plate goes on, you're like, oh my God, I can really imagine that if this was screwed in, you are just... Because it just feels like your nose is just like that against the front of the thing.
There's that, but also the fact that they had to put it in sideways and then turn their head inside of it. So that's even more like claustrophobic, like your nose scraping against the front of it. Hey, look, so that's all the crazy Doctor Who talk out of the way. Let's do some more crazy Doctor Who talk. No season 20, new collection set announced yet. And people are getting very upset about...
to Ian Levine's fury. How dare they? Upset. How dare they not have released another collection set?
It's disgusting.
It was fine during COVID, but now they've got no excuse, apparently.
I love it. So no new season, whatever, set announced yet.
I almost replied to him and said, don't make any difference to me. I've still not finished season 9. I'm only on the mutants.
Yeah, a lot of people I've spoken to who got that set are like, oh, I'm still like, less than halfway through watching the stuff on it.
I mean, my problem is, like, once upon a time, it would just be, I would watch the box set. Then I moved in with Mum and Johnny, and it was, I need to watch the box set with Jonathan. Then Annie came and started living with us. Sake. So it was like, right, I've got to watch it with the pair of them. And now it's just the three of us living together in one house. So every time it's just me and Annie at home. We're like, shall we watch the box set? Oh, no, we can't because Jonathan's not here. So we're waiting for him.
I don't know about you guys, but I smell a sitcom. I smell a sitcom coming out of this. Missing episodes as well. So there's been a lot of chat about, apparently the missing episode forum went into meltdown. Yeah. There was some rows on the missing episode forum. Now, all we know is we don't know, and all we know is that we don't know anything. Yeah. Philip Morris says there are 4 missing episodes in the UK that he knows about, and a further 2 overseas. And Paul Venezes says he knows of 2 missing episodes, possibly 3. Yeah. That are floating around. Not that Philip Morris is necessarily the most reliable of individuals for things like this, but what I've heard is there are 4 missing episodes in the UK in the hands of private collectors. Yeah. And I don't know what they are. No. I think there's a few titles that do buzz around. That, of certain episodes that are around. But it's the same old stuff. Like you hear news about the missing episodes, but it's never news. It's just like somebody else has popped up and said, oh yeah, no, there are X number of whatevers around, but there's still nothing to substantiate that. So
no. And then there's the other story, not that this means anything, but the gentleman that located Galaxy 4 airlock and episode 2 of Underwater Menace recently passed away, and he left a huge collection of stuff, most of which, or half of which, wasn't even labelled. So I believe that there are a couple of people on Twitter who are going through the collection and trying to sort out what's what. Yes. And hopefully maybe there's some more Doctor Who in there.
You never know. Richard Latto, as I understand it, has inherited Terry Burnett, I think his name is. He's inherited the collection. But I guess, they're working their way through it.
Because I think it was Stephen Cranford, was it, that posted about it?
Oh, and Stephen Cranford, yes, right. I can't imagine that if there was an episode of Doctor Who in that collection already that it wouldn't have been mentioned or at least submitted to the Beeb or whatever, because I mean, I know they're unlabelled, but was the Galaxy 4 and Underwater Menace tapes, were they labelled? I guess they must have been.
I think they might have been labelled as Doctor Who, but whether or not they were labelled specifically or maybe they were mislabeled as other stories, I can't really remember now. But you never know. There might be something.
It'll just turn out
away.
that we get a bunch of new fucking episodes of Basil Brush that have just turned up out of nowhere. It'll be something boring and shit like that. Lenny Rush has joined the cast of Series 14. Have you seen Am I Being Unreasonable, Matt?
I haven't. My brother has. He thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do in Doctor Who. Because he just won a BAFTA, didn't he?
Yeah. He did just win a BAFTA.
I watched it. I watched the
amazing.
BAFTAs and I watched him get his award. So it was weird because then like a few weeks later.
Go on. He got announced.
A few weeks later he then gets announced. Yeah.
Yeah. He is. His comic timing is just like unbelievable. Like considering how young he is, like it's just nuts how good he is in front of a camera already. Like he's got such a great charisma. And I was thinking like, he is destined to be in Doctor Who at some point. He's just so good. Fantastic that he's in the series. And then just finally, obviously we've got more filming happening. I mean, filming may be wrapping soon, I guess, on season 14. Fairly soon.
I guess so, because they're filming the finale, aren't they, at the moment?
Yeah, they're in the last block at the moment, which has seen Shooty and Bonnie flying around on a moped. I think Shooty said he was really hungover that morning when they were shooting because he just come from a festival in Paris. That boy works hard, I tell you that.
He was up to no good at the riots.
He kicked it off. RTD's posted a 3-word teaser in DWM for season 15, which has already started writing, which include the phrases garden, firmament, and diploma. So I can imagine from that first one, we've got the Vervoids coming back.
Lovely.
Which would be very exciting. But yeah, I think that's everything.
Will they look even more penisy than ever?
I hope so. More penisy and wearing leather gear. That's what I'm expecting from it. Is leather jackets and Doc Martens.
Speaking of leather gear, Shooty Gatwa's got another costume.
So he's got that biker gear costume, and then he's also got like a military costume as well. He's got like combat fatigues on.
I mean, what's going on? He's got more costumes than John Pertwee.
I kind of like that, but the only thing I'm a little bit iffy on is that they are quite. Besides the fact it's like a shirt and a jacket, they're all quite severe departures. It's not like you've got the same silhouette out of each outfit, which I suppose is great for Al because it means he'll be able to produce umpteen versions of Shooty's Doctor in various outfits, and I'm sure that Russell is doing that. It's no good. It's no good for him.
He wants one silhouette that he can just repaint.
Yeah, one jacket that he can change the color on every 2 years. I mean it's interesting. Out of all the ones that we've seen, I only really like the announcement photo one. The leather one, which is basically like Tennant's.
I like his Shaft outfit.
The shaft, and also the beanie, which I think is just going to be such an iconic look.
Oh yeah, the beanie one looked quite good, didn't it? Yeah, and the 60s one. I think the 60s one is the best one. Although Regency Doctor Who looked pretty cool too. Yeah, they all look good. I think it's. He looks good in anything. This is the problem.
That's the thing. I can imagine him starting each adventure maybe in one of those two kind of central outfits, and then he gets into costume for one. And it does seem like, from what he's been saying to people on location, and from what people have been seeing on location, it does look like we are actually getting a Beatles episode of Doctor Who.
Really? What?
Because so people have seen actors or extras dressed as Beatles on location.
Are we talking John, Ringo, etc., or insectoid creatures? Because this is Doctor Who. It could be either.
I mean, that would be brilliant if they all just in the studio they all just turn into these fucking millipedes. So people saw that on location. Spoilers, by the way. Also, there was that bit shot of Shooty and Millie walking across Abbey Road.
Oh yeah.
Which was actually just a street in Newport, I think, or something. And also,
it's Doctor Who. Everything is just a street in Newport.
We'll get to it. Waters of Mars. There's one street in Newport in particular that plays quite a special role in this. And also, I think I saw on Twitter, Shooty signed somebody's notepad, and it was like a Beatle notepad, and he said, "You're going to love the 60s episode." So, let's see what happens there. But it'd be great if it does happen.
Wow.
I mean, that would be really exciting.
Could it be the Disney money? Because Disney have got that Beatles documentary. Maybe Russell was like, look, if we've got the money...
It would make sense, and I kind of wonder... So Magical Mystery Tour apparently turns up in the new Indiana Jones.
All right. I'm seeing that tomorrow.
Oh, well,
although as of this going out, I will have seen it.
You've already seen it?
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed or not enjoyed it.
Or I was very middling on it, like Curse of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is a completely separate topic for a Beatles themed podcast that Annie and I can start. Yeah. But I wonder if they're going to sell their catalogue to Disney soon. It seems to be going that way, that a lot of artists are like selling their back catalogue.
Yeah.
And with that happening, and also them using Peter Jackson's tech that they used for the Beatle doc to do this new Beatle single now and then, I wonder if they're going to end up selling their catalogue. And if anybody gets it, it'll probably be Disney. It kind of makes sense for it to go to Disney.
Yeah.
So maybe they know something we don't, and they'll get... I mean, it'll be great until the episode comes out on home media, when they just have to strip all the Beatle music from
Can you imagine?
from the episode, and then it has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. They just play some generic 60s jangly music over the top. But hey, there we go. Right. The Waters of
Exciting
Mars,
times.
Matthew.
You shrunk on my screen.
I've shrunk?
Oh, you're back. Yeah, your bandwidth is too low.
Oh, mate, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised my bandwidth is too low. I'm in a shed in the middle of New Zealand. I'm in the middle of New Zealand's most... One.
There's probably a sheep or something chewing on some cables outside.
There's a sheep just wandered past the Wi-Fi perimeter and has interrupted it with its woolliness.
It's just stopped there.
Or Tom Baker, superannuation Tom Baker's turned up and gone, and has interrupted the bandwidth.
Speaking of which, we've got a Tom Baker Patreon video for people out there.
Let's plug the Patreon real quick. If you like the Review of Death, but you're a bit sick of having a week off of it when it comes out every fortnight, then head over to the Review of Death Patreon, where you can become a patron from as little as £3 a month, and you get access to a bonus episode every other Thursday, so you get a weekly podcast that way. And we're making our way through the 60th anniversary Big Finish CDs. But most importantly, and perhaps most bewilderingly and terrifyingly of all, we did a commentary for the Tom Baker video fucking confession tape / religious sort of purging session. Mental breakdown. Just Who on Earth is Tom Baker, which genuinely needs to be seen to be believed. I can't quite fathom still what we saw that day.
I watched it with Johnny and Annie like a couple of days after, and they were just agog. They were just like, what is this?
It is honestly unbelievable. So that is coming out as of you watching this now on Thursday or Friday of the week this comes out. It's coming out next week. So get your Patreon pledges in and you can watch it, plus a bunch of other commentaries, reviews. There's a whole live show on there we've never released. There's lots of really cool features and bits and bobs on there, plus updates and ways to get involved in the podcast and the Discord. Nice. So the Waters of Mars. Now this was selected by our followers on Twitter and Instagram, so thank you for everybody who voted. Did I tell you what came second? What we nearly ended up doing?
Was it the War Machines?
Yeah, so we had to do that at some point.
Yeah, I like the War Machines. It's all right.
War Machines is great. I was kind of surprised that was so high up on people's lists for us to do.
Well, there we go. We haven't done a Hartnell for a while, I guess.
We haven't. We probably ought to.
We did do Dalek Invasion of Earth, didn't we? We haven't done a Pat in ages. We should do a Pat.
We haven't done a Pat in a long time. Okay, we should do a Pat. Because there's a Hartnell coming up later in the year that I definitely want us to do.
Right.
Because of who may or may not be returning to the show through the 60th anniversary specials. So yeah, we'll definitely do a Pat and a Bill in the next few months for sure. So The Waters of Mars is an episode that you and I, when we were in our kind of biggest Doctor Who hater period, were like, hey, well, at least that one's good out of the new series stories. Like, this was always the one we were like, yes, this is properly good Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I went into it with that mindset, and I came out, basically feeling the same. Couple more caveats, maybe, that we'll come round to. But I absolutely love this one.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's just bloody good, isn't it, really, just from start to finish. I mean, it's so good that Annie and I watched it, and Johnny came home one night and he said, oh, what have you been up to? And we said, oh, we watched The Waters of Mars. And he went, oh, why are you watching that for? And we're like, well, it was for the Review of Death. He's like, oh, that one? I was like, Waters of Mars is really good. And he was like, wait, which one's this? With David Tennant? Oh, with the water creatures. Oh, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. So even him.
What other episode with what The Waters of Mars has the water creatures in it?
I think he was thinking of the Ice Warriors and Empress of Mars. I think he was getting a bit muddled.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it is just brilliant. It's what a good story to sort of not end his era on, but almost end his era on. A great penultimate story.
A great penultimate story. And the way it ends is really interesting. Honestly, the way that it ends is the only thing I have an issue with this story, but we'll obviously get round to that when we come to it.
I mean, I had very few issues. I must say, I had very few issues. I had an issue at the start, which is only minor, and I think you might agree with me.
All right, we'll get to that in just a second. Matt, can you give us a rendition of Everybody in Love by JLS, please?
I've no idea how that goes.
Come on! It was only number one for bloody ages or something. It was in the charts for Everybody in Love. Can put your hands up.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. I don't know it, but I recognise it. Yeah.
You love it. You've got it on repeat. I know you do. UK box office.
When you said JLS, I was like, Justice League Society? What?
Oh, for fuck's sake. Jack the Lad Swing.
UK
box office number one. Apparently, that's what Dad told me. And my dad knows more about JLS than I do. It's not even from his bloody generation. I think he just likes the fact they were called that. I love
your dad's probably just like, oh, I'll just come up with some shit.
It might actually not mean that at all. I won't. I'm not going to look into it. I think at that point I was just like listening to Tenacious D on a loop. That was it. I wasn't really listening to much else. UK box office number one, 2012, The Disaster Movie.
Christ, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was number one, the box office. And in video games, 5 days before this episode was broadcast, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 came out.
Oh, nice.
So that's how far back we're going. So in the same week, people had to deal with the Time Lord victorious and Ghost being betrayed by General Shepard. It's just tragic all round. Written by Russell T Davies and Phil Ford.
Yep.
Who was co-producer of Sarah Jane Adventures, and he also, the only other TV Doctor Who credit he's got is another co-writing credit with Moff on Into the Dalek, I believe.
Yeah. And Dreamland.
Which is a good episode. And Dreamland, which he wrote solely by himself. And he also wrote the Torchwood episode where Gwen is impregnated by that alien creature and it interrupts her wedding with Reese.
That's such a good episode.
It is a good episode. That's like the batshit comedy one. You know, they were like, why not? Let's just do that. Directed by Graham Harper.
I know. You see that name at the beginning, and that is just... That's a sign of quality. It is. It's safe hands, and you think, oh, this is going to be good.
I was looking through the list of episodes he's done, And, you know, there aren't many stinkers, if any, in there, really. So Androzani was his first story. He was working on the show as far back as bloody Power of the Daleks on the floor. And then he took his director's course. And then the first story he's given as a director is Androzani. I mean, it's just like, you can't get much better than that.
It's like, let's shake this
Revelation of the... Revelation of the Daleks. And then he comes back for the new series with Rise of the Cybermen Age of Steel.
Really good.
Army of Ghosts, Doomsday, 42, Utopia, Time Crash, Planet of the Ood, The Unicorn and the Wasp, Turn Left, The Stolen Earth, Journey's End, and this, which up until now is his most recent and probably his last contribution to the series.
Wow, I didn't realise he did so many in Series 4.
Yeah.
Fucking hell. He did a lot.
Isn't it impressive?
I love that he did Time Crash as well. I didn't remember that. So that's nice. That
They probably thought, hey, look, the only way we're going to get Peter Davison back is if we give him a Moffat script and the best director that he worked with, which was annoyingly his last episode. So you said that the main problem that you had with this story was right at the start. What was that grievance?
So we start off with that lovely vista of Mars and the TARDIS lands, and really nice materialization effect because you've got that poof of dust, really good. I just think the pre-title sting is a bit weak because you've got the Doctor on that cliff top seeing Bowie Base 1. And then Inspector Gadget comes up behind him. Gadget. Yeah, that robot fucked me off as well. Actually, the robot doesn't fuck me off. It's the guy who operates the robot. Roman. Roman the wanker. He's a right irritating.
Oh my god.
Oh, he's so annoying. Anywho, so I think that's a bit of a weak opener. This shitty robot is just like and the Doctor's, you know, and it's annoying because if they let the pre-titles go on maybe by 4 or 5 minutes longer, you would have had the transformation, the first transformation of one of the people, and you know that scene ends with is it Andy? Is he the first guy that transforms? Yes. You know, it ends with him turning to the camera and her screaming, and then it cuts. That could have easily have been a cut to the base, and as it zooms out, we have the scream of the theme tune, and then that would have been good. I
suppose you could have had that, or you could have had the Doctor figuring out what the Bowie Base 1 thing is all about, like what it means.
Yeah.
Because I think, does that happen before we see Andy turn, or is Andy turn first?
I think it might do.
I can't remember.
It might happen.
That's a good point.
It does.
Gadget is an interesting one because I think undoubtedly what they're going.
Gadget.
Sorry, Gadget. I think undoubtedly what they're going for is Wally, because Wally came out the year before, and I watched.
It's a right fucking Wally.
He's a right fucking Wally. I watched, courtesy of William Carlisle, thanks for sending me the link, I watched the Doctor Who Confidential for this story last night.
Ooh.
And it was really interesting because they feature quite a lot of the tone meeting for this episode. I guess because they knew they were going to be pushing the boundaries with the look of the flood and how kind of scary they were going to be. Because I seem to remember them trailing this a bit like they trailed Blink in the lead up to that episode going out. They were kind of saying this one might be a bit frightening for the kids, maybe just a bit of a heads up. But Gadget in that tone meeting basically just looks like Wally. And I think as they got closer to broadcast, they probably went, we have to maybe change it up a little bit. But yeah, like Gadget is fine. It is Roman that is the kind of the cringy aspect of it, like that bit where the Doctor zaps Gadget and Roman's getting electrocuted. I watched this episode with Stell, so she dropped in with a couple of great quotes that I'll get to, but it was one of those moments where you're like, if anybody walks in on this, you know, those Doctor Who moments, you're like, oh, please don't walk in on this moment. It's just so embarrassing. So yeah, I mean, Gadget is fine as he is. I think it's his creator that's the cretinous one, really.
And there's this really annoying thing that I seem to remember a lot of Doctor Who at that time used to do, where the Doctor says, "Oh, remote control," or whatever he says, and then the guy is like, "Yeah, turn to the left and turn to the right." It's like, we all know what fucking remote control is, dipshit. You don't need to tell us. But they do it a lot. They do it in the Cyberman story. They're like, he's voice controlled and turn left and they...
Oh, yeah,
and it's like, okay, we get it. You don't need to show us. I don't know.
But the show is made primarily for 6, 7 and 8-year-olds, Matt.
Well, open your fucking dopey ears, you deaf little shits. Come on.
Oh, God. Okay, we touched on them very, very briefly at the start, but let's talk about The Flood.
Yeah.
Not the 8th Doctor comic strip, but the villains
The Flood.
of
Yes, I remember that one very well.
Yes, The Flood. What a fantastic adventure. The Flood are so good looking.
So
not
good
handsome.
Looking. Oh, they're so good looking. I'd go out with one.
Go on, give us a sloppy snog. The Flood look great. I mean, that is Millennium Effects working at their absolute peak of prosthetics.
Yeah.
And again, watching Confidential was really interesting because they do a test of the water effect that just doesn't work on Paul Casey. They're on the Torchwood hub and they kind of fit this bald cap to him and it's supposed to look like it's kind of coming out of his hairline. And he's obviously like blinking the whole time as it's kind of running over his face and they're like, this is not going to work.
That just reminds me of that bit in Airplane when he's
when he's sweating. That's exactly it. But what's really cool is you see a few versions of the prosthetics that they've kind of mocked up that they show at the Tone meeting, and Julie Gardner saying, I think this one is going too far. And I think Nikki Wilson as well is there and sort of saying, yeah, I think if you can blend those, because one of them, I think their hair falls out as a result of like being infected by the flood, and they have this kind of and they're kind of bald and they've got these really white eyes and it's all cracked sort of up to the top of their head and stuff. It's really freaky. But I think that they've pitched it perfectly. I think it's horrible looking, but it's not sort of, you can't maintain eye contact with the screen looking at them,
Yeah. I mean, when we watched it, I said to Annie, I was like, do you think I could show the kids this? And she was like, hell no. She was like, no way can you show them that. It's one of those things which Doctor Who does so well, where they get the simplest seeming idea and it just works, just this idea of water just cascading out of you. And like you said, it's not really completely horrific. The fissures around the mouth they're sort of simple. It's not bloody, it's not gory, but it's just the cracks and that black maw. And I think that coupled with the white eye contact lenses, it just really makes for a great design. It's a shame, really, that we never got a figure of it because one was produced. There was one planned, but it just never got released.
Yeah, I find it quite ironic how severely dehydrated they look with the crack, considering that they're just pissing water out of their face. But that's like a cool, thing that they've got going on there. And
I remember at the time people sort of said, "Oh, it looks a bit like the Ice Warriors as well," because it's just in that little area. And obviously, this is the first time the Ice Warriors get a mention, I think, in the new series.
They get a mention on screen, and they're kind of purposefully skirting around what their relationship was with the Flood, whether or not they that was the reason that the Ice Warriors had to leave Mars, or if they were the ones that managed to freeze it in the ice block. But they were quite heavy, I think, on the science of this at the time, even though maybe watching it seems a bit more fantastical than it really was, because I think maybe just a couple of years after they discovered that there was water on Mars.
Yes, I remember.
And obviously all the memes popped up on Twitter, but it's definitely it's near future. It's probably as close to near future as Doctor Who got around that time, to sort of saying, you know, theoretically we could be up there living on a habitable base like that. And of course we'd have to have, you know, a way of growing vegetables and all that. When Andy turns and he takes a bite of the veg, Stell was like, is this about evil carrots? She was convinced that was going to be the cut and thrust of this, as the carrot got them all. But
I mean, she's not wrong.
She's not wrong. It was the carrot. But it's just they as a villain are just, you're right, it's so simple. And I think that the way that they turn the convulsions is just so
very creepy,
and the way that they kind of set it up as like an aesthetic, that it happens not off camera, but it happens, you know, in the background, so you don't really see what's going on.
It's so well directed that those shots where you've got you've got the girl rabbiting on about just bollocks, and he's in the background out of focus, but you see him drop to his knees, and like you said, you see the convulsions. It is masterfully directed, and he does it you know, later on as well. And like, it's great because when Andy turns, the water sort of spits out of his mouth across the camera lens. So it's almost like a POV shot for her. And that's it. You know, she's been hit by the water, and then we cut.
She's done.
It's so good. So good.
And the way that the other guy converts him with his hand on his head, and he's sort of like
that
shaking
is like
on
something
the floor.
from a horror film. It's so good.
That is such a great shot. And the way that their torches appear and are kind of like moving between him and Andy on his knees and stuff, and it's just like it's so good.
And one bit of, I don't know if it was serendipity or not, but something that I always love in that sequence is obviously the water is very cold, or the water might be warm, I'm not sure, but the condensation that is just coming off of both of them, and it just adds to this whole aura of, this is some freaky shit going on.
Well, it is cold water, because apparently it had to be a certain temperature for it to be safe for them to kind of come out of their mouths in case they swallowed some of it.
Yeah.
So apparently it was cold, so they're all freezing on that location. God. You know. And
when was this
shot?
shot?
For their art.
Was this shot in the winter as
well?
Oh
God, who knows? Probably around winter. Yeah.
I mean, it's Wales. It's always bloody winter, so
it's always bloody freezing. Of course, we're on a quarry at the start as well. Like, and it's base under siege. It's just like classic Doctor Who.
It really is. It's a great, it's just perfect, isn't it? Really.
I also liked, and I don't. It's something that I completely forgot until it happened. Was the kind of part human, part infected Flood, the lady.
Yeah, her eyes don't go, do they? Who
gets converted.
Yeah.
And I thought that's like just adds another level to them. That the fact that they have that duplicitous sort of like covert nature to them.
Yeah.
Which I think just because it's only a small aspect of of them in this story. And it does feel like that's something you could maybe tap into again, because the Doctor's always on about, you know, water waits, water's patient, you know, the way that he kind of characterizes water.
Yeah.
I think there's room for them to come back. Maybe not in the exact same way that they do here. Maybe that could be like the end game, like you finally see a fully converted Flood or whatever. But I think the fact that they can kind of hold off on fully becoming, you know, the Flood, and they can infiltrate, I think that is a really cool additional part to their character that I completely forgot about.
I mean, just you saying that then, I was just about to ask you, I was going to say, well, what do you think? Do you think they could come back? And initially I was going to say no. But then when you sort of said, oh, you know, if you did it differently and, you know, maybe you see a fully converted Flood, I was thinking, look, you could probably do something almost quite Last of Us sort of thing with this.
Yeah.
Where you could have like a planet that has been besieged by this thing, you know, the Flood or whatever, and water is the commodity because, you know, all water is tainted and you've only got a few people surviving.
Or they've like, we have actually now fully exhausted our supply.
Yeah.
You know, and now all we have left, I guess, is the, you know, somebody who's so desperate, so like, they can't, you know, because you can't live without water. I think that is something that they don't tap into, is the fact that we are what is it, 98% water or whatever, or the planet. You know, obviously she mentions there's so much water down on Earth. I think that there's more you can do with them, but I think that in order to preserve this story almost and to add another layer to the flood, you need to do something different. I don't think you can just do another zombified running around corridors, cracked face thing. I think if you want to do the flood again, it has to be different. And I think there's a lot more that you could do with them. Yeah, you're right. There's different scenarios you can put them into. The kind of, besides the flood, the main crux of this story is basically the 10th Doctor and his sort of relationship with time. His time is running out. We know that he's got 2 more specials to go. What did you think of the trailer as well at the end, for the end of time?
Oh yeah, that took me back, seeing that. Oh God, I remember rewatching that, you know, rewinding it back and rewatching it. It's a really good moral dilemma, this. And it works very well with the 10th Doctor because I guess his Doctor is slightly more emotionally charged than other Doctors. You know, I don't know if I could really see Tom working in the same way.
He'd be gone. He wouldn't be hanging around. He'd be like, fuck you lot, I'm out of here. I'm down the pub.
Yeah, bye. Here, have a jelly baby. And, you know, the story does a good job of framing exactly who everybody is. And, you know, all these people are going to die. I think that's my other gripe with this, and it's, again, very minor, is that bit at the beginning when he's like, oh, you're so-and-so, and then is, choom, cut to the
that got
screen,
a bit daft after a while,
doom, close in on the headline, doom, close in on the picture, and you're like, for every single one of them, you're like, there's about fucking 7 people here. It's like, come on, get on with it.
We get it.
They all died, yes, right, we know. But that aside, it's very clever because you do think, like, well, what the hell, what is he going to do? And obviously the Doctor is instinctively wants to help people. He doesn't want to leave them in the lurch. So it does create a very good moral dilemma. I don't think have we ever had a story quite like that since? I guess if you did, it would just feel like you're treading on what has been before, really.
Yeah, you're just doing this again. I think it's almost like the only sort of equivalent I could draw is it's a bit like, you know, the base under siege thing is so done in Doctor Who. You know, it is the archetype of you almost have to break down seasons into, well, this is the season opener, here's the multi-part Dalek story, here's the finale, and here's the base under siege story. It just is an archetype of Doctor Who. Yeah. But this is almost like that bit in Austin Powers where the guy gets squashed by the steamroller and you flash back and you see his life. It's like all those faceless and nameless technicians and starship captains that have been offed by rubber monsters or Daleks or Cybermen in previous base under siege stories. Yeah. It's like, well, actually, no, if you dig down, you know, this is an event in history, like the moon base, for example. That's like, you know, you can imagine all of their obits and stuff now. Yeah. And I think that this was the first time that Doctor Who really tapped into the reality of, you know, these things. And I think having the 10th Doctor there, you're right, he is the conduit through which you would experience all of those emotional beats. Like, okay, these are real people and they're really going through this. And again, the flood, I think, is great for that because it's so tangible, like the threat of it and the way that the water is shot. And they were very, very, again, from watching Confidential, they were very, very careful to go, look, if we shoot it like this, you know, remember, one drop, one splash. So if we shoot like that and it looks like they may have got splashed by some water that's hit the floor that's come from the ceiling, well, they're dead. And as an audience member, you're like, okay, well, they're dead. Yeah. So to get Graham Harper to do it, who was such a meticulous director and he's so good with his cuts and the way he shoots through things, it's all part of adding to that horror of it, really. And I think humanizing them and doing this whole thing, it just, every base under siege story afterwards, I think, has to look to the waters of Mars. Yeah. And go, you know, you can't just off a bunch of random faceless soldiers or people in helmets or people in lab coats. Yeah. You know, you have to really sort of examine the fact that these are people and this is happening to them.
Yeah, and it does it... very cleverly, because I mean, I said earlier about when Andy gets transformed and the other girl is just sort of whittering on about stuff, but that stuff is what cements her as a real person, and they all have their own little, you know, it always seems to be, as someone is being transformed, they're just waffling on about, oh, you know, my brother back home was doing this, and, you know, obviously the really sad one that you get is the girl towards the end. I don't know if I noted her name down.
Steffi, I think her name
Steffi,
is.
that's right. And then she's, you know, she knows that she's going to be a goner any second, or she might have already been hit by the water, but she puts on the home video of her kids or whatever, and it's heartbreaking because you think, well, that's the last thing she's ever going to see, and then when she turns, by that point the cracks have already started to show, but she's still got the human eyes, like there's still a little bit of her clinging on. It's just so cleverly done.
But do you know who the MVP of that moment is? And I think of this episode, it's Murray Gold. I think that is one of the most beautifully scored moments, that, because it's got that disaster movie kind of inevitable heartbreak thing going on. Like, everybody here is going to eventually face, you know, their maker. And I think that the way that he scores that moment is just perfect, because there's something kind of beautiful about it. You know, there's something that's kind of, it's epic, but it's also very personal, and it's a real tragedy, you know. But I think Murray, this has got to be one of his finest moments.
Oh, I think so. And I think, and that moment when she sort of turns around and that sort of gentle music sort of turns to something slightly more horrifying, but like you said, there's still that beauty to it. I don't know why, but that always reminds me of Curse of Fenric. And I can't think what bit in Curse of Fenric, but there's something of the music there that always reminds me of something from Fenric, because I think there's just like a bit of synthiness in it. And obviously Mark Ayres was obviously sort of trying to mix more sort of orchestral sounds, even though it was all done on synthesizers. You know, he was trying to get that sound out of things to make, I guess, Doctor Who feel more filmic. And so here you're sort of doing the reverse. You've got an actual orchestra, but you've just got the bit of the electronic stuff coming through. I hope we get more of that in the new series, you know, because I think later on Murray starts to play with a lot of electronic music in sort of more of the Peter Capaldi stuff.
Yeah, I think it suits it, is that blending, because then it kind of brings, it's you know, literally the past and the future kind of orally, sort of like coming together and fusing. But I thought that bit was just fantastic. Also, the bit where they're being chased out of the botanical dome as well is a great bit of music. Steffi watching her kids while she gets infected. The slow motion bit on the surface of Mars when the Doctor looks over at the destroyed shuttle. That is a brilliant piece of music.
Really cool.
And then obviously the kind of the Veil Decem kind of bit that plays when he sees Ood Sigma in the snow. And I don't know if I misheard it, but I haven't watched any other 10th Doctor stories that recently. I think there's a slight hint of the Geronimo 11th Doctor regeneration track. You know, the piece of music that plays right at the end of time. I think there's a bit of that in here somewhere.
Oh, maybe. That does that sound. Plays. Yeah.
But he's just it's effortless for Murray Gold, like just effortlessly elevating those moments and just pitching it just perfectly to hit the right note, and just to, you know, obviously there is a bit of an OTT kind of, okay, you're really tugging at my heartstrings and it's not really connecting with how I'm feeling emotionally on screen.
Yeah.
But when those two things do meet and they are perfectly pitched, there's nobody better than him, you know. No. And it made me excited to hear his music again, because when he's on form, you know, and he's all guns blazing and he's really got material to get his teeth around, then it works, you know, and he you know, he isn't really bettered.
Very much so. And I think also, before we move on to, because I think we should talk about Adelaide Brooke in a moment, because obviously she's a key part of this story. the production design on this story is also really good. And it sort of goes back to what you said earlier about that, this story is only set not that far in the future. Like you said, you can imagine it happening. And I think because they obviously shot this on location in a couple of different places, and it feels very industrial, it feels very real, it doesn't feel like some of the spaceships or some of the space stations that we've had in older Doctor Who stories where, it is like sci-fi sort of the future sort of thing. It feels very now, and it's like, well, actually, I feel like I've seen this kind of kit in, NASA videos or, stuff like that. And it just really helps sell that realism, which is really great, even with a janky robot. Even that feels like... I
have a feeling...
Although it's janky, it feels like a proper probe thing.
I'm fairly certain that parts of this were done on the Torchwood hub, on the old Torchwood set. Yeah. Because there's like that circular door and the bit where the Flood are all in a line and they're putting their hands in the air. I mean, I only really twigged watching Confidential, but when the water's pouring over their heads, I'm fairly certain bits of that are done on the hub.
Right.
I guess because the set was big enough for them to be able to do all the water effects, because everything's running at 12 volts so that nobody gets electrocuted, and they're obviously being very careful with the way they manage that stuff. But you're right, the production design is great.
We don't want another Battlefield.
We really don't want another Battlefield. Even like in the script, the way things are written, like where they explain why they haven't got bikes and they have to walk everywhere, and you think, well, that makes sense, because you can't really go out for a spacewalk on the surface of Mars whenever you fancy, a jog. Yeah. So it makes sense that all those sections of Bowie Base 1 are connected through those really long tunnels. And again, it just gives you an opportunity to do a, being chased down corridors sequence. Yeah. Which again, Graham Harper's got on his quad bike and he's shooting all that stuff handheld again, and it looks great.
So good.
It just looks fabulous. Captain Adelaide Brooke then. So she is the kind of Lindsay Duncan, she's the companion in this story, always touted as the companion for the story.
Yeah, because that was the whole thing, wasn't it, for this little selection of specials. I remember them sort of saying, like, there'll be no full-time companion. Each story will have its own bespoke companion. Obviously, Lady Christina has found new life on Big Finish because, of course, only coming up very soon we'll be hearing her again.
Oh, Jackie Tyler and the Sixth Doctor and Harry Sullivan and Lady Christina. I mean, God. I mean, it is just that meme of them throwing shit at a fucking dartboard, isn't it?
It really does. I hate to be mean, but God almighty, what was that? What was that about? If we listen to that,
I mean,
and it's good, my God.
I mean, we have to listen to it because it's going to be once and future, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, right. Well, look forward to us finally getting around to that on the Patreon when Two's Company or whatever it's called comes out. She's a great. I mean, it's Lindsay Duncan. Obviously, she's fantastic. To get an actor of her caliber on the show,
yes,
and to play a character like that, something she can get her teeth into, and she does have this interesting relationship with the Doctor. I thought it was quite interesting how, she's obviously immediately keeping an eye on him, but there is a natural feeling. It doesn't feel too crowbarred in that she's sort of like, okay, I kind of trust you in this. It doesn't feel like too much of a stretch that she'd go from name, rank, and intention, and having a gun on him, through to, because she, you get that childlike wonder of wanting to be in the stars, and so of course she'd believe that this person is from somewhere else and is trying to help her. And that bit with the Dalek, which I think was the thing that sort of everybody bought into the fact that the Terry Nation estate are like, right, you need a Dalek in every year. This was like the start of that starting, wasn't it? What do you think of Captain Adelaide?
I mean, she's fantastic because, like you said, an actress of her caliber. And those brilliant scenes where she shuts herself away and talks to the Doctor over the camera, over the intercom, it's so well done. And they're both working. So, I mean, I don't know how they shot that. I don't know if they were shooting that as live, and they had a like.
I was thinking that. I don't think they are.
Screen. Oh really?
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they are. I mean, I feel like they would have shown that on Confidential if that was the case.
Because I was like, God, it's so good. It doesn't feel like she's reacting to a recording. There are a few cuts in there which made me think, oh, maybe they have shot this separately.
I think her close-up is all one take because they use the audio from it for the over-the-shoulder shot, and you can see in the reflection she's almost, going miming it word for word, but it's just slightly out, or like her facial features just aren't quite melding. But yeah, that's a great moment.
And I quite like the fact that they linked it to the Dalek thing, because again, it reminds us as an audience that, this is only the near future, and, as an audience, at a time when everybody watched Doctor Who, everyone would have remembered, that was the finale, So all that kind of stuff would have been in the audience's consciousness. So that's really clever. And they obviously play up the whole idea, like with the other characters, she's a mum, she's going to be a grandmother, or she is a grandmother, and I love all that bit where the Doctor and her have that moment, and the Doctor sort of basically sits her down and says, because of you, all of this wonderful stuff is going to happen. And, he lists off all the different places that people are going to go to. Slightly disappointed they didn't mention Draconia, because it feels like Frontier in Space isn't too far in the future. So, they missed a trick there. She's just fantastic. And I love how she sticks to her guns and sticks to her integrity and her morals right to the very end. Because throughout, she's been told that she's got to die, and she kind of takes it on the chin. Initially she's like, well, you've got to save me. And then the more she hears about it, and the more she hears about the future, and I guess, the legacy that her grandchildren and her family are going to have, she's quite resigned to the fact that she's going to die, even to the point where she's quite cross when the Doctor comes back. Particularly for someone who's only met him, an hour ago or whatever, and has only known him for a short amount of time. You kind of feel like that sort of relationship, some long-term companions don't get that kind of idea of how intrinsically linked the Doctor is into like the web of time, and what he can see, and what's allowed. She's really great. She's a fantastic character and just brilliantly acted.
I love that line, who's going to save you? And the Doctor says Captain Adelaide Brooke, and because he knows that she's not a bad person, and the way she pitches that performance is like hard-nosed vet, but does have a twinkle in her eye, and isn't a kind of all bluster, no sort of like twinkle. She's a brilliant actor, and she hits that note perfectly. It's like it was written for her. You can't imagine anybody else playing that part.
No, not at all. Because there's the other guy, isn't there? There's the Australian guy who she sort of gives him a bit of a hard time, but even then there's a moment where I think she sort of shoots him a wink or a little smile, and you know that even though stuff's obviously gone on, and she's not doing it just to be horrible. There is that softer side to it. Because that guy turns around and says something like, "Oh, you never did forgive me for," and then I think he gets cut off. I don't know. Has the Waters of Mars novelisation come out yet, or is that
it
one
comes out in July
soon? So as soon as that came up, I was like, "Oh, I wonder if any of this sort of stuff will be explored, and will Phil Ford go more into the lives of these characters?" I guess that's what
I'm
you
really
want, isn't
looking
it, really?
forward to that one dropping. I mean, Russell, again, sort of almost rewrote the book with the way that the novelizations can expand on what's on the screen, because with the Rose novelization, which it's mad to think that was his first sort of dipping his toes back into being involved in the show to that degree was that novelisation.
Yeah.
He hadn't done anything for such a long time, and then suddenly, that pops up, and then obviously the lockdown followed, I think, shortly after, and then we got the Sarah Jane stuff, and he was writing more bits. Let's, I think, maybe move on to the central nugget of this story, at least, as we start wrapping things up and we move towards the end of the episode, and because it's obviously intrinsically linked to Adelaide Brooke and her character, and the fact that she kills herself at the end of this story. And I mean, it's incredibly dark, but it does feel, it fits, it works. It's not like it comes out of left field, but for something like that to happen in a show like this, and it not feel out of place, and it not feel a bit like maybe we're touching on something there that, it's done very tastefully, I think, considering the fact that it is what it is. But it has real world implications, because the enormity of this moment has been set up from the start, and the fact that the Doctor has gone against all of his morals and all of the sort of the rules that he sets himself as a traveller through space and time not to interfere, and the fact that he finally has just snapped and gone, do you know what if I did just do whatever I wanted, and that is the consequence, that it happens to a character of that moral fibre, that she is the one that sort of like, puts him in his place by doing that. And it's a testament to this story and the performances of both David Tennant and Lindsay Duncan, and the writing obviously of Phil Ford and Russell T Davies and Graham Harper's direction and Murray's music. That moment is just, it works so well, and is, I think, the best illustration, besides maybe Father's Day, of the consequences of getting involved in time and messing around with time. And really, you can sort of see a through line from Father's Day to this story, because the Doctor is the one sort of laying down the law, saying, look, you can't change anything, no matter how painful it is. This has to happen. This is an established event. I think my only issue with it is, and this is, I think, this was my problem with the story, is I sort of feel like the Time Lord Victorious thing slightly overshadows the last act of this, because you know that it's gonna happen. You know that the Time Lord Victorious is what the Doctor becomes. But he really only becomes the Time Lord Victorious for those last 5 minutes or whatever it is. And the fact that, Russell says in Doctor Who Confidential, we've been building to the Time Lord Victorious basically since the show came back. And the point of it is to show that the Doctor can't travel on his own. He has to have somebody there to ground him. But I think to do it in what is basically, if you count the Next Doctor, special 3 of 4.5, 5. It doesn't really feel like we have been given enough breadcrumbs through those stories to know that this is where the Doctor's going to end up, emotionally. And I think for him to snap is like, whoa, the Doctor's finally going to go crazy. But it's almost like we need the end of time to kind of continue that story. And the fact that it doesn't, and the fact that the Time Lord Victorious, regardless of the fact that they made it into a multimedia event that spanned books, a Blu-ray re-release of these stories, and a live event, the Time Lord Victorious begins with that slow motion segment where he sees the shuttle explode, and basically ends as soon as Lindsay Duncan blows her head off.
This is it.
And I'm like, this isn't the moment I think that people build it up as. I think the Time Lord Victorious is a spin-off of that idea, of that thread, but it's not related in any way, and it's not a story arc, it's not a thread, it's not like we've been building up to this naturally for this whole period.
No, that is my main gripe as well, because, when obviously David Tennant's a superb actor, and he does that ego and that, that sort of megalomania so well. He has that twinkle in his eye that he's just shot away just a little bit. And you could imagine to sort of paraphrase Terrence Dicks, you could imagine Tom in this sort of a role, because Terrence Dicks always used to say, Tom was the Doctor who I thought could turn to the dark side. And it's the same with David Tennant's Doctor. You always think that there's that scary edge to him, because he's just so bloody hyper, and you think, something's going to give at some point. And I think it's a shame that the Time Lord Victorious thing doesn't then carry on into End of Time, because it feels like they've missed a trick. It feels like you've set something up, and then I can remember watching End of Time Part 1 and thinking, there's going to be more of this sort of stuff. This is going to be a really important part of why the Doctor regenerates. And then to cut to him just coming out of the TARDIS in the End of Time with that bloody sombrero on and the thing, and then making the joke about the car keys, I was like, oh, what? This feels so completely disconnected from the build-up of the last episode. I feel like I'm missing something here. It feels like there's a lost story somewhere, because it doesn't feel... Well, yes, Dreamland. It's a shame that it really does just only happen in those last 5 minutes. Because I just kind of wanted to see... We've just got the Doctor here going pretty much full Valiard, almost. And even if you didn't say, he's the Valiard, because you don't want to get steeped in fan wank and all that bullshit. But I do think somewhere out there is a 10th Doctor final story where the 10th Doctor starts off, he is the baddie, and something happens. Because Annie and I were discussing this. We were sort of saying, well, what would we do if Time Lord Victorious... forget all the multimedia shit, because that's got, who gives a fuck about that? And it has no relevance on what Russell was writing at the time.
No.
But, what would that look like? And, you kind of want to see the Doctor sort of, not as the villain, but in a sort of semi-villainous role. Maybe you have the companions come back to try and sort of take the Doctor down, but, try to show the Doctor, this isn't who you are. And perhaps with his powers, he thinks he can save Donna. Maybe he thinks he can make Donna's, it doesn't matter, Donna's brains can explode because I'm the Time Lord Victorious and I can do anything. And maybe he does something and it does kill her. And he goes, shit, I'm not all powerful. I fucked up. I need to go back, sort my life out, save my best friend. And in doing that, it triggers his regeneration. And we have the status quo back to normal. The Doctor returns to being a hero. And he feels like, right, I've learnt my lesson, but now I need to become somebody else. Rather than all that stuff we got with the Master turning into everybody, which seems a bit mad. But that is what I would have liked to have seen. Something like that. Because that would have felt like a story arc really reaching its crescendo and then feeding into the next chapter of the programme.
Since when have you had access to the 60th anniversary scripts?
Oh, I know, sorry.
I think if there is a thread that you can follow, but the thing is, I think you're right. It's disconnected, isn't it? It's not. You know, all of that is great. Because it never comes
up again. Like the Master's never
doesn't.
you're the Time Lord Victorious. It just gets dropped, and you're like, oh, okay.
I think it's like when I think of the Time Lord Victorious or what that looks like to me in the show, it's just the last 5 minutes of this episode. Maybe David Tennant with the gun in his hand in the End of Time Part 2, but again, that isn't connected to this at all. And maybe it's that the Doctor is selfish enough to do the whole Time Lord Victorious thing in this story, and it gets Adelaide killed, and then the Doctor's kind of thing about I'm not ready to die, I can't die now, it's not my time yet. That kind of selfish behaviour nearly gets Wilf killed. And then he realises he can't be like that. Adelaide's already gone through my selfish behaviour. I'm not going to lose Wilf. I will sacrifice myself because this is how the story is supposed to end. And I think for a long time, you know, there's a lot of conversations you see on Twitter about people being quote unquote revisionist about the way that certain showrunners were viewed at the time. And I don't think I'm misremembering this when I say that when Stephen Moffat came on board, I think people were quite deflated by the way that Russell's tenure ended with those specials, particularly The End of Time. Yeah. And I think it's because what was established with The Waters of Mars and the Time Lord Victorious wasn't followed through on, and it was almost a cop-out in a way.
Yeah.
We have to send the 10th Doctor off, but the story obviously has to start with him being, I'm just sort of jolly bumbly, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's not where we left him off as a character the last time we saw him. You can't act like the water break is, Dreamland. You can't act like that is the missing story in that equation, because that, we've reviewed that. Nothing is touched upon with regards to the Doctor's actions in The Waters of Mars.
That
and there's no
fit
real
anywhere,
lead into the end of time. Exactly. But I certainly remember people feeling quite deflated about Russell's tenure, specifically because of the way that the End of Time handled this Time Lord Victorious thing.
Yeah.
It did feel like it was kind of fumbled right at the very end, and I think that left a sour taste in people's mouth. And they were looking forward to Stephen Moffat coming in and going, well, let's see what he does here.
Yeah.
Let's see where he can pick off where Russell left off and didn't quite get over the finish line with that last sort of little flourish.
Yeah. Little did we know.
But I think, little did we know. I think that starts with The Waters of Mars.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Time Lord Victorious is a flash in the pan, blink and you'll miss it.
Yeah.
And then we're back to the status quo at the start of the End of Time.
Yeah.
And I think if you hadn't had the promise of this character change in the Doctor and this reassessment of his life, which appears to be what he's heading towards at the end of The Waters of Mars.
Yeah.
And then this massive reset in between the, Waters of Mars and the End of Time, I think, people would have viewed it differently at the time. But as it is, it seemed to me that people were quite disappointed with the way that was handled. And I suppose, really we ought to do the End of Time at some point this year just to kind of connect these two up and see if there is anything left of that Time Lord Victorious in the End of Time. Because it seems so focused on saying goodbye to Tennant and doing a story with the Master, an epic showdown with the Master, that it's obviously never referenced again. That's the problem with this story, and I don't think it hangs over the entire episode. It's not like I don't enjoy this story as a result. I can divorce the Time Lord Victorious from the Waters of Mars, but the problem is it is the ending of the story. And the consequence of the Doctor's actions is that everybody survives, even though we're told that isn't going to be the case. I just another thing as well, in that last scene, I think David's performance is really interesting because the 10th Doctor has this kind of braggadocious, swaggering, smug, sort of self-righteous thing going on anyway, I think. But he's always just on the right side of it. Yeah. It might get annoying and it might get a little bit like, I don't really like my Doctor like that, but whatever. That's just his character. But David is almost, I think, self-aware of that in his performance, and so he just tips it over the other side just slightly in the way that he's sort of smiling out the corner of his mouth, and he does that whole comment on, I save a couple of little people, and it's just like, whoa, who are you? You are displaying 10th Doctor kind of, cocksure characteristics, but this isn't you. You shouldn't be saying these things.
Now you're just pure cock.
Now you're just pure cock. And that is down to David's performance and the way that he has chosen to illustrate that change in the Doctor. I did find
that's what I mean by you're almost full Valeyard there.
Yeah. It's not much of a change though, but that's testament to the way David's played it, isn't it? That I believe that along this whole time you have been capable of just tipping over into that, your emotions, or, if Rose was on the line and it meant that he had to turn full back, turn heel, he would, that's it. Yeah. It's his love and his emotions getting the better of him.
that's what I said to Annie. I said it would need to be it would have to either be something to do with Donna, or I'm going to destroy reality because I want to get Rose back. She shouldn't be there. The Time Lords aren't here to stop me, but I want what I want. And in doing that, he ballses everything up, and he's like, shit, I have to save the universe and fix my mess. And,
I like the kind of callbacks to Pompeii as well.
Yes,
with him being responsible for causing that, and it's sort of like, but we know
again,
that has
that's
to
another
happen.
clever
It's interesting.
through line, isn't it?
Really, really nice. When Stell was like, "What happened with Pompeii?" I was like, "Oh, he's responsible for Pompeii."
They all died.
And she was like, "That's a pretty colossal fuck up," like, oops, The other thing she said as well in that last scene where Yuri and Gemma Chan's character, that her reaction to him, I think, is really interesting. And that sort of, she plays that scene so well. Like, it's not like a companion comes on board the TARDIS and sees the interior and goes,
no,
oh my God, what is this? It's like she's been just rushed out of this crazy moment and she's suddenly back on Earth, and you can see the shock in her performance. It's played so well, and like, it's like how every other normal person would react to being in the presence of somebody like the 10th Doctor. Like, you're nuts. Like, you can't act like this is normal. Which I think is just a really beautifully pitched bit there. But the thing that made me laugh was Yuri being told to kind of go off after her, take care of her or whatever. And Stell said, she's a biologist that's been living on Mars for 5 years. I think she'll be okay on her own. It's like that fucking typical, of course, go after the woman and, look after her or whatever. Like,
I mean, I put in my notes, so it's like, so they didn't die, but what, did she have like a mental breakdown?
I mean, it appears to me that, like, she's the other casualty, besides the people that died on the surface of Mars and Adelaide. She's the kind of other casualty of this, that, like, so what did she, what happened after that? I'd love to see if in the reports that, when they're being interviewed, is like, I got picked up by some nutter in a blue box and ran off.
Well, this is it. And I mean, I don't know if this will get mentioned in the novelisation, but one of the things that I thought of was like, well, although Adelaide Brooke still dies, things have changed significantly, because here you've got three people who have suddenly, inexplicably, have come back to Earth by no means of space transport, known to man. How did they just suddenly go from there to there? How do they explain that?
How do they cover that up?
Yeah, how is that covered? And then, of course, for Adelaide's family, and for Adelaide's granddaughter, she finds out that, actually, your grandma killed herself. Why did she kill herself? We don't know. Maybe it was stress of the job. Maybe it was this. Maybe it was that. The place, the place that she was in charge of exploded. Maybe she came back home, couldn't cope with the fact that she'd lost all of the people that she was supposed to be looking after, and topped herself. Would that then necessarily inspire her granddaughter to go into space?
That's a really interesting point, because it's almost like, because they build up the whole thing about, she's inspired by what, you going out amongst the stars, but dying there, and she goes out to look for you. And the fact that she's not out there anymore, it's almost like the Doctor has ruined this girl's inspiration, because rather than it being like a kind of, man, she died up there amongst the stars and it being really poetic, it's like, no, she blew her brains out in
the hallway of her house.
Exactly, and that's slightly different, it's like her motivation is ruined by the Doctor. Not that isn't a worthy reason to do it, is to, like, avenge her, or not avenge her, but do it in her memory and do it in her honor, because she but it's like, do it in her honor because she couldn't handle it.
It's weird. You either do that, or you're like, oh no, actually, I don't think I would go in for that space exploration stuff. Because look what it did to my grandma. There, then
you end up, you end up wanting to off yourself. But what I think is so great about this story is that the blame is pinned solely on the Doctor for that. And that's just another level of how badly he's fucked up. Is that this girl's inspiration is now totally different. And I mean, God, what a story. The fact that we're still kind of talking about it at that level where it's not explicitly stated how terrible that must be for that family, but the motivations of this character we never meet have now changed significantly because of the Doctor's actions. You know, it's brilliant. It's such a moment in the show. And I don't think it can be touched really, but the fact that they've told that story once. Yeah. Oh, excuse me, I bumped the mic. They've told that story once in that moment. It can't be bettered. I think that is just the way that you tell that story, you know. Yeah. Let's just have a quick look at what the Rodders thought before we give our final thoughts on the story. Jacob says the best episode... go on.
I should add that I did go straight onto TARDIS Wikia after this and looked at the Time Lord Victorious and tried to see a synopsis and find out what it was all about. And I thought, man, that's a lot of waffly nonsense going on in that whole thing.
What, of the multimedia event?
Yeah. I was just like, it's not really... It's not what I would have imagined. The Doctor fucks off and, like, goes after some aliens that no one's ever heard of.
I must have read more of it than you did, then.
Yeah, you read the novel, the first one, didn't you?
I read both books.
Oh, did you? I never read both. I never read any of them.
I listened to, I think, all but maybe one or two of the audio dramas, and then I did the escape room adventure
you
thing.
did that.
But that has basically no bearing on Time Lord Victorious, besides the fact that Brian the Ood gets his head blown off at one point. He gets assassinated. And it's like, obviously Time Fracture was supposed to be its own thing, separate to Time Lord Victorious, and they've gone, oh, well, let's stick a couple of story elements in there that ties it together, which is kind of neat. It's a nice way of doing it, but it's not like you get a full picture by listening to any one of the audio dramas or reading any one of the books.
No.
I mean, it's just sort of an extension of the idea of the Time Lord Victorious, isn't it? It's not like this has any connection to the Waters of Mars. It's just that they went, Time Lord Victorious would have been a cool, like, season 5 for David. Let's do that, basically, if he turned fully bad. But it's, it's pretty waffly. Yeah. Yes, so let's have a look and see what the Rodders thought. Jacob says, best episode of the entire show. That's pretty high praise. Daniel, honestly, never understood the hype for this one. I think the monsters are a cool visual, but beyond that, I find it unrelentingly dull. Wow. Even the Time Lord Victorious stuff seems odd. He tries to change history and regrets it, even though it seemingly has minimal side effects. I think it has minimal side effects in the moment when you watch the ending of the show, but I think as we've sort of discussed it and you look at it a bit deeper, it's like, okay, the side effects aren't universe-ending implications, but they are significant enough that you think the Doctor's fucked up here. Like, even in the context of that little girl and the fact that Adelaide Brooke has to kill herself because of the Doctor, you know?
It's far worse from the Doctor's point of view, you know. Is it better for me to have left her to die than make her take her own life, you know? How does that make you feel as a person? You know,
as the Doctor, who would never do anything like that. You know, it's not. You know, it's so far away from what they want to do and the effect they want to have on people. So I think when you say, Daniel, sort of minimal side effects, I think it's like, okay, sure, there hasn't been a massive alien invasion or a Flux style event that's ended the universe, but it's kind of worse than that, really, isn't it? It's more human. It's more personal.
Exactly.
Bradley says, a great story for the most part, but I'm personally not that keen on the third act. I know what it's trying to do and it achieves that, but I don't think it feels in character for the Doctor. The base under siege aspect and the flood as a monster are spectacular though. At Martang66, just dreadful. I really cannot understand what people like about it, Lindsay Duncan aside. The Doctor goes bad angle is interesting, but totally fumbled. The robot is annoying as hell, and the monsters look like messy eaters after a bowl of porridge. Ben, a great sit-up to a disappointing... If you're listening to the audio version, Matt's face all the way through that review was pretty illustrative like someone of what he feels.
Just kicked me in the bollocks.
After all that. Ben says, a great setup to a very disappointing conclusion to a character arc, which in my mind doesn't fully appreciate the consequences of the Doctor's action in the story. I think it does, but I don't think it says it in as many words, does it? I think that's just something you take away afterwards, when you think about it. And Grant says, the absolute definition of a writer not limiting their main character, brutal and devastating, which is something that I noticed actually in The Confidential about this story is, obviously David is in a bit of a reflective mood being interviewed for it because he knows that he's about to leave the show. And so there's a bit where he says, it's interesting playing a character like the Doctor because he can't really change that much, and there's a sort of like a knowing grin he has to himself. Yeah. Like he's like, you're kind of stuck playing the same character every episode.
Yeah.
And so he says, the fact that he knows that his time is up and we know that we're heading towards his final days means that you only really have a couple of opportunities to do this. And this is the moment where we do it. And I just thought it was interesting the way he seems to kind of be a bit self-aware of the role you're in as Doctor Who means you don't really have any wiggle room for development. But they do do
Tom
it here.
Baker said it all the time, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, they do it here. And I think if you look at it from a bigger picture perspective, sure, it doesn't really have much of an impact on the Doctor. It doesn't really have much of an impact on the 10th Doctor, considering he's only got 2 45-minute or 2-hour-long stories left to go. But the implications of it from a real-world perspective in that moment, I think, are enough to sell the Time Lord victorious. It's just that as a concept, as a wider concept that could have been a bit of a story arc. It's not a story arc. It's just something that happens at the end of this story. But taken in that respect, I think it's grand.
And I think, the lasting effect of it is, in universe, is that the other Doctors just think of the 10th Doctor as, oh yeah, he was a bit of an egotist. Because, it feeds into the whole I don't want to go thing.
Totally.
He's full of his own self-importance, this Doctor, to an extent. So, who knows how that... Fuck me, he bloody comes back again. He's back in the 60th anniversary. That gobshite again. We'll is he never off the air?
Get that gobshite off the television. Maybe we'll get some reference to it. I mean, it's almost like it's been trailed that the 10th Doctor or the 14th Doctor has unfinished business. There's a reason that he's come back here. And it may not just be to do with the fact that Donna is back and there's something going on there with the fact that she has to remember who he is for the next 2 stories after the Star Beast to even happen in a context of the Doctor with a companion. Maybe we're gonna revisit this moment because like the implications of it in the immediate moment are pretty severe. The implications of it for the rest of the specials, bang the mic again, is minimal. But maybe this is a long game that Russell's playing. Not that he planned it, but maybe this is a longer story. Maybe we're going to see a bit of, something to do with this in the 60th anniversary. I would kind of hope that's the thread that they're dangling to and coming back to for the 10th Doctor, 14th Doctor. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
That was The Waters of Mars. Yeah. Thank you very much for watching and listening, ladies and gents. We greatly appreciate it. Next time on the Review of Death, we are venturing back to the wastes of Skaro for the Genesis of the Daleks.
Oh, bloody hell. Very good.
Another heavy hitter. Wow. It's a 6-parter, Matt. You might want to start watching it sort of now.
Right, I'm off. I got to start watching Doctor Who.
So tell us what you thought of The Waters of Mars in the comments below, of this review in general, and of Genesis of the Daleks. Head over to the Patreon where you can check out our review for The Artist at the End of Time, plus a swathe of other things, and get on there ahead of the monumentally baffling and morally confusing Tom Baker, Who on Earth is Tom Baker commentary, which is just batshit. It drove Matt to the point of insanity where I got a video of him with his shirt off drinking wine on the sofa.
Yeah, put that on Patreon if you want.
No, I was going in my own personal collection. And yeah, Matt, you wrap it up for us, brother.
Well, that was Waters of Mars. See you next time for Genesis of the Daleks. It's going to be a good one. This was a good one. We'll see you then.
It was.
Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and all that jazz. And hopefully, by the time we see you, they'll announce another collection set just to make Ian Levine happy. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.